This is the Open University.
So, we're here on top of a hill in
Malacca.
Malacca, which is an interesting contrast to Kuala Lumpur because it's got a Portuguese atmosphere and it's very touristy. At least the centre of town is very touristy. I wanted to correct a few impressions that I might have given with the last video that perhaps were inaccurate. And so I'm here with my guide Liana. You already pointed out a couple of mistakes I made, that the British came here looking for bananas and oil. Which is not true.
Yes, that is not true because oil was only discovered in the late 19th century. So before that, they were here to harvest.
Palm oil? That was used before.
No, palm oil only came much later when Malaysia was transitioning from an agricultural state into an industrialized state. So from farming, we brought in palm oil, and it's also partially for the government's efforts to industrialize the nation. So they had this scheme called FELDA, which is Federal Land Development Authority, which allows Malaysians to venture into the rainforest and wipe it out and plant palm oil plantations.
I see.
But this was back in the 1960s. Yeah.
It's probably all very boring for people, but so I'm going to jump about and skip. First of all, what's the birds we're hearing here? What do you call these birds where it goes?
I think the general term for those birds are myna.
Myna birds.
Yeah,
okay.
because they are sort of considered a pest here. They're everywhere.
Okay, so do people trap and kill them and stuff?
No.
You can't eat them?
No, but there is also a serious infestation of crows. And near my house, there's a bunch of trees, and the city hall frequently guns them down so they can fly elsewhere to nest, but it doesn't work.
Here's another totally random, unrelated question. You work in advertising as a copywriter in Kuala Lumpur, and I'm interested in the extent to which you think advertising in this country is promoting a Western lifestyle, is a consumerist lifestyle of luxury and, you know, the kind of thing adverts usually promote. Is that inherently Western, or is there a Malaysian idea of consumerist luxury and the good life?
Yes, I think there's a mix of both because the ethnic Malay population is increasingly having a higher purchasing power. So the products that they sell are religious skewed, or things that are very concerned more to their community compared to the rest. That's why if you see Malay advertisements on Instagram or along the highways, it's always all about slimming, or diet pills, or whitening, or like
skin whitening.
Yes, it's a big thing here, and sadly many celebrities advocate these products, and you see them starting out as like normal looking people, but there's a sort of skin bleaching craze here. And even though there are one or two celebrities that say no, Malay people just keep loving the skin that you're born with, we're not white people, but I don't, for some reason there's still that archaic mindset that white is nice.
Is it like South Korea that people are spending money on plastic surgery?
Not so much on plastic surgery, but K-beauty, Korean makeup, is super huge here, and that concerns me because the shades and tones that they bring in are like for Snow White Korean people, and I think that's also why Malays they like a fairer skin so that they can adapt to those makeup. But then again, this is just based on my observation.
To what extent do the two populations, the main populations here being the Malays and the Malay Chinese, to what extent do they interbreed? Are there many relationships across those lines?
Yes, but only if they come from the same social class or background or education, or perhaps if they speak the same language, if they express themselves in the same language like English, because rarely you get ethnic Chinese Malaysian talking in Malay that has no accent.
Do you think America is still seen as a kind of model society here, or is it seen as a dysfunctional, past its peak kind of culture now?
I think the general perception towards America, especially among the Malays, is that, oh, they support Israel and they're Zionists, and we as Muslims, we must defend ourselves from them, and we must condemn them. And even Obama came here twice, but there wasn't any like massive demonstration, which is funny because all these demonstrations are usually organized by the Islamist party. For example, when Donald Trump was announcing to move the embassy to Jerusalem, there was a protest, and everybody was like, oh, don't eat McDonald's, don't drink Starbucks, because they all fund Zionism.
That's interesting. Wow, so it's very Islamic response. What about a stereotype of British people? How if you had to make a pen sketch of a British person in like 10 adjectives, what's a typical British person like in the perception of a Malaysian?
Well, there is a pop culture figure of a British person, but this is acted by a Malaysian, and he is a teacher, an English teacher.
He uses white makeup to look more...
No, he just looks like he's mixed breed, like he can pass off as a Westerner, but he's actually a local, and he speaks like normal Malay. But yeah, he's mostly widely known for being an English teacher in a kids program.
And what does he look... How does he act when he's being stereotypically British?
The funny thing is that when he speaks English, he still has a Malaysian accent. He doesn't put on like a specific British accent, because the TV show is geared for people that are having a hard time learning English. So if you put on an accent, they wouldn't understand.
So it's not really satire; it's more like educational.
No. Yeah.
So he doesn't sort of say, I'm going to invade your country, or I mean, if there's a stereotype in Scottish people, for instance, Monty Python would often stereotype Scottish people saying, I won't hijack your plane for £1, and then he cuts it down to, all right, 50p. You know, it's a sort of stupid thing about Scottish people being mean, for instance. British people are, you know, if you had to have 5 adjectives for British people, stereotypically here, what would those be?
Rich, good looking.
Good looking? Well, it's all good so far. Wow. There's any bad ones? Arrogant?
Likes alcohol.
Oh, really? Wow. Because, of course, you don't drink in a Muslim country.
And, well, this is not my personal stereotypes, but just in general, from what I see. But for me, sometimes I think that all these entitled expats, they're taking half of my salary, and they're doing a third of my work.
Right.
Yeah.
And as someone who works in advertising again, how acceptable would you say it is to play on national stereotypes or racial stereotypes within your advertising? Could you show a Sikh cab driver and make him stereotypically Sikh or whatever? Would you get complaints? Is there like an advertising standards authority here which would say you shouldn't do that?
There are, but it's very biased, and it's not consistently regulated. But there was an ad, a TV ad for the Ramadan period. So it was made by a TV station, and it is shot as a guide for how to behave when you're visiting a Ramadan bazaar. Now, Ramadan bazaars are places where you can buy food to break your fast in. So this guide was skewed to the non-Muslims. So they showed non-Muslims as if they're like uncivilized people who go into the bazaar and doing indecent things. So that got a lot of complaints, mostly from people online, that why do you want to dumb down the society? We non-Muslims and non-Muslim Malaysians are not like this in real life, and you don't have to exaggerate something to make a point. I think in Malaysian advertising, especially in the Malay market, there's lots of exaggeration and making fun of people who are disadvantaged.
Tell me about this advertising campaign, Fitna Internet campaign, where people are depicted looking at their iPhones with long Pinocchio noses, and the slogan is, if you share a lie, you're a liar. This goes along with a political campaign which involves possible 10-year prison sentence for spreading fake news on the internet. So it sounds like it hasn't yet passed, this bill, it's still being debated. But which party is advertising that?
The ruling party, Barisan National Front, they, I guess they got inspired by Donald Trump with the whole fake news tagline. So, in a way, our electoral system has similarities with the American system, where we employ Cambridge Analytica for the ruling party's own advantage. So I think it's a two-way thing, because we're learning from Americans and Americans are also learning from us, because our PM is also sort of buddy-buddy with Donald Trump, and there's like some link between these two countries in the 1MDB scandal. So about the advertising campaign.
Sorry, what's the 1MDB scandal?
Yeah. It's this 1MDB stands for One Malaysia Development Board, and it's supposed to be a sovereign fund, but the money was spent buying a yacht costing billions of dollars, which was highlighted in the Rachel Maddow show recently, and it got a lot of views from Malaysians. And on top of that, there's also statements saying that the Saudi royal family donated 2.6 billion to us for fighting ISIS. So I can't tell you the story from the start to the end, because there's loads of plot twists, and please don't quote me on it. I'm just telling what I've been reading and hearing in the media.
Would you say that as one of the things we learned in Britain is that the colonies, places like Hong Kong, were used as a kind of test bed for anti-riot techniques or crowd control techniques, which were then imported back into Britain and used on us native Britons? It was a sort of place where you could do more extreme things and test them out. Do you think Malaysia was used in that way too? That maybe some of the authoritarian government you have here might be used. Maybe Donald Trump would learn a few things from Malaysia and start using them in America.
Sorry, using what?
More extreme. It can be experimental ground for more extreme crowd control, or
You mean like the FRU?
No. What explain the
Federal Reserve Unit. They are usually deployed in massive demonstrations.
Yeah. So with more force than would be used in a Western country. They use water cannons and things now.
Yeah, they do, but and people get arrested and get thrown into jail. And there's also a case of police abuse, like captives die under police custody.
Right. So you'd say the democracy here is not particularly secure. It could at any moment topple over into oligarchy or even authoritarian government.
Yeah. We've been under the same party since independence, and I would say Singapore is worse, but then again, Singapore has a better quality of life, so the people are less likely to protest, even though there is a movement there. But here, it gets even more emotional, because the living standards are sort of like plateauing, and people get angry quickly. But then again, if they protest and they go to jail, they will lose their job, and that will be even more frustrating to them.
So the famous governor of Singapore, what's
governor?
his name? The original, he's dead now.
Lee Kuan Yew.
Yeah, Lee Kuan Yew. He was sort of accredited by people like Zizek in the West as the founder of a kind of authoritarian capitalism, which is no longer a democracy. Essentially, it's a kind of hierarchical system in which capitalism is absolutely triumphant, and in which there's zero tolerance of any immorality or uncleanliness. So Singapore is famously repressive and boring at the same time, and too clean, and like a Japan with kind of Saudi Arabian morality. That's how people see it. So you
what
think
people?
Well, people like me. My records
You're just one person.
My records were banned in Singapore on moral grounds because they had too much swearing in them, for instance. But from what Zizek says, for instance, he talks often about this Singapore model, which is being imposed more and more on other countries. So it's like Singapore was the first there, but actually the whole world is going to be a bit more like Singapore, with a kind of paranoid state mechanism of anti-terrorism, and terrorism being used as a justification for clampdowns and more fingerprinting and biometric profiling and all the rest of it. So you see Malaysia as kind of second in the line for that after Singapore. It's becoming more like Singapore.
Well, not really, because Singapore is much smaller in scale, so it's easier to control. Whereas Malaysia, you have so many interests, and it's a lot more complex. So I don't know if those.
Singapore is not Muslim, right? It's
no.
So
it's
Malaysia,
completely secular.
This kind of Muslim influence in Malaysia, bringing, for instance, anti-Americanism, seeing the Americans as Zionists, that must make a kind of a very different political atmosphere here. It must make them less likely to want to be like Americans in other ways, I'd imagine.
But then Americans, they have a military base in Singapore.
Right.
And
none in Malaysia.
No, and they enjoy close ties with Israel.
Yeah.
And which brings me to wonder how Singapore has a president who is a Malay Muslim, and I wonder how she would communicate with her Israeli counterparts.
Right. Wow. Tell me about Brunei. Is it interesting? Have you been there? It's a very tiny, very rich state.
Yeah, it's a mini Saudi Arabia, but I don't really. I don't want to get thrown into jail for this, or because.
If you say something against Brunei, you're going to get thrown in jail in Malaysia.
No. Well, the thing is, I don't.
We're not going to put your second name. It's okay.
I don't have much of an opinion when it comes to all these political things. I'm just saying what I have been consuming, and what I see is Brunei as a oil-rich state, but then there's nothing much.
There's always a helicopter chasing me when I start talking about politics in any country. A helicopter comes. Okay, let's get off politics then, since it's kind of boring or dodgy. Would you say Kuala Lumpur is a city for hipsters? Hipsters.
Hipsters can survive anywhere. They can colonize anywhere. So yeah, KL is a home to many hipsters, and it's a prosperous community.
And there's nothing I could do as a hipster there, like...
You're a post-hipster.
I'm a post-hipster, but let's say I were a hipster and I was posing naked on my skateboard. Would I get arrested by the morality police?
Sure, not morality police, by the police itself.
By the police?
Yeah.
Okay.
Indecent behaviour in public spaces.
So I couldn't be Ryan McGinley or something here. I wouldn't be able to take lots of naked photographs.
If you go into the jungle, you can, because there is a river. It's called the Magic River, and it's where all the hippies go, and like kumbaya, and without clothing.
So you can go back to nature out of the cities, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there some famous kind of hipster or artist who's Malaysian, who does, like Shepard Fairey or someone like that, who does street art, or Banksy type people?
Yeah, the most famous so-called street artist isn't even Malaysian. He's from, I think, Lithuania, and
But he's only famous here.
Yes, and he was behind the gentrification of Georgetown in Penang, because he was commissioned to do murals in like neighborhoods that...
So the government paid him to do street art?
I'm not sure the government or the state or the city hall in
Yeah.
Penang. So a lot of people, residents especially, complain that previously we enjoyed peace and quiet, and now we have all these tourists coming right in front of our living rooms.
It's kind of ironic that now the government forces street art on people. They used to arrest you for doing street art, and now it's totally the reverse. Now the normal people are complaining that the government is forcing them to put up with the street art, which is gentrifying the neighborhood.
Yeah, and he also did a sort of thought-provoking piece, because in Johor Bahru, the capital of Johor, it has a high crime rate. So this artist created a mural that shows one side there's a lady with a handbag, and the other side is a robber with a knife, and these are Lego figures. So the authorities threw white paint over it because it didn't want to show the realities of the city.
So there is still street crime in certain areas. Are there certain no-go areas, as Donald Trump likes to say about every city, in Kuala Lumpur, for instance? Seems pretty safe to me. I walked around, I didn't feel danger.
For me, yeah, it's safe, but at night, it's a different creatures come out.
And women get harassed even if they're wearing headscarves and things?
No, I think to have a woman having a headscarf is expected. I mean, when I was setting my car to repair, and the guy that was waiting in the waiting room, he was curious if I was a Malay, and I said yeah, and he thought I was from Sarawak, which is a state in the Borneo Island, because I didn't wear a headscarf, he was questioning my Malayness.
And if I was a woman and I wore a headscarf, am I less likely to get hassled late at night by men in the wrong part of town than if I wear like hot pants and show lots of flesh?
I think it happens to both types of women equally, as long as people see you as a sexual object of desire, they would do and say things.
But if I'm in a hijab, they can't really even judge that, surely.
They would. I mean, women
just based on the little slot of my eyes.
Women in hijab gets raped. Women in bikinis get raped. It's, as long as you're a woman, you're always the victim.
We're sitting outside the three museums, actually, the Governor's Museum, the Literature Museum, and the History Museum. Do you think people still are into literature in this country, or has the book been dépassé?
There was a survey that discovered that only 3% of Malaysians read at least one book in a year.
Right.
So that tells you the state of reading here.
And there's a fantastic bookshop, but they've called it junk. It's the only really good second-hand bookshop in Kuala Lumpur. They call it junk, which is a little bit insulting word to me. I don't know why you'd say old books are junk. It's kind of nice because it suggests flea markets and cheap prices, although ironically it has rather expensive prices. But that's my interest is, but it's a kind of sad, dead culture in a way. Even in Britain, I don't think many people would be buying those old penguins and things.
But then again, people still buy loads of books because the Big Bad Wolf sale, where they sell millions of books in warehouses for 24 hours for 1 week straight, they get a lot of reception, and people are cutting books by the crates. So there is a reading culture, but not so much of a thinking culture.
Thank you very much, Liana Anonymous.